Well, what's going to happen? I think these parables, these collected parables in Matthew 13, really answer the questions, because it has everything in there: missionary work, testimony, opposition.
And with the missionary work, verses 47 and 48, I think are amazing, because who gets to come into the gospel net? We're not just talking house of Israel here. Fishes of every kind.
Yet, probably at that time they couldn't even comprehend.
But I wonder how much
any more than right. In the Peter Whitmer home, anybody understood what was going on as well. Well, let's go back to the parable of the sower, because I think it's purposeful that it's placed where it is, because it is first letting that seed take root before we can get the kingdom going forth and doing all the things that we see. Elder Talmage calls it the parable of the four kinds of soil. It's not really the sower that's the issue there. It's the seed. What do you draw from that parable? What is it you think that Jesus is saying to us, to them in their day, but also to us in our day, as we are able to watch with 2,000 years of hindsight to the growth of the kingdom? I think he's speaking of institutions as well as individuals in this. What do you see in these verses here?
To me the key on the parable of the sower is when the Savior responds and begins to explain the parable. In verse 19, when anyone heareth the word of the kingdom and understandeth it not, then cometh the wicked one and catcheth away that which was sown in his heart. Mm-hmm. It's that phrase that was sown in his heart that becomes so critical to all of these, is how's your soil prepared? Right. And you talk about the application for today. He describes the types of soil. Is it just a thin layer on top of a rocky surface that when it begins to grow, eventually those roots have nowhere to go, right, and we're not going to be able to produce fruit?
I think it's also saying to us, no disciple should be surprised if Satan's going to come after the growth of your seed. I think he's saying right out of the chute, you're going to have some opposition. You're going to have some trials of your faith. So what is he saying, you think, there to his disciples of that day on where do you put the seed? What do you want to have going on in your life there?
There certainly has to be a preparation of a person's heart. Now, the people hearing this are going to hopefully individualize this and understand what he's talking about, as well as those that are going to be doing missionary work. But he talks about the wayside soil. That's an interesting visual. You'd have this plot of ground that you would till up, and you'd take the seeds and you'd go out and chuck them left and right. Always outside that planting area was the area that you would walk. And property in the Middle East tended to stay in families for hundreds of years, and people would be walking on that for long periods of time, such that it would become hardened and baked by the sun. It would be almost like cement. Mm-hmm. And when you threw your seeds out there, those seeds that landed on that wayside soil, that compact cement-type soil, they couldn't be tilled into the ground. There was surface, and the birds would quickly come and eat it up. And later he says, it's comparing our hearts to a heart that is hardened. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I can't speak for you, but I remember a person years ago in one of the wards that I lived in. I was really angry at him. I had some feelings towards him. And I remember one sacrament meeting, I came in and sat down with my wife, and I looked up, and he was on a stand with his wife. And I thought, it's okay if he says the prayer, but if he's the sacrament speaker, I'm not going to listen to a word. And it turned out that he was the sacrament speaker. And I remember just hardening my heart. I nothing you can say to me that I'm going to listen to. I don't want to hear it. And after the meeting, and my wife knew what I was up to, and she said that was a good meeting, and I said, I didn't think so. She said there were good things that were said in that meeting. I said, I didn't hear any of it. And I didn't. I hardened my heart. And I think the Savior, this is not just for the real way. This is for everybody.
Yeah.
That we need to keep our hearts pliable and soft.
In fact, one of the things of what you just said with that experience, I think we can all relate to. I think the parable of the sower is not just talking about different kinds of people, I think in some respects it's talking about different times and seasons in our own lives.
It's the same person
Right.
who may experience the
And
challenges.
how are we going to receive that seed? Because it's easy for us to say, well, I can understand why so-and-so didn't accept the gospel because that seed was on that stony path or whatever. I think we ought to look at this this parable as maybe those seeds in those 4 different kinds of soil affect me at different times in my life, and I have to look at that personally.
Let me just add to that, too. As you talk about the final production, whether it's different times in our life we produce more or less, or whether it's different individuals, but when it's all said and done, there are different amounts that are going to be reaped as a result of these seeds that are planted, and there are those that are going to come forth 30-fold and 60-fold. But really we are individuals in different situations, and the Lord doesn't expect us all to bring forth bushels and bushels, that depending on where we're at, we give all that we can and bless the kingdom in our own way, as long as we're willing to give our all.
I think that's an excellent point, and it reminds me of a thought from Brigham Young where he talks about whether we do little or much, if we're doing the best we can, it is the same as the angels of heaven that are doing the best they can as well. Well, what about those, we've talked about the parable of the sower. What do we see as we lump all those others together about what we would call the parables of the kingdom? These early parables are characterized as the parables of the kingdom. What do we learn about the wheat and the tares? Now, we have that in the Doctrine and Covenants as well, but what message is the Savior saying to his disciples then and to us now about wheat and tares?
Wait.
And what do you mean by that, Camille? Because that is probably the hardest thing for a lot of us to do. What's he saying?
In the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about being merciful to others, and we will receive mercy, to treat others as we would like to be treated ourselves. And there's something, and judging not unrighteously. The idea that there is time and an opportunity for each one of God's children to make some changes in their life.
Right. And I think along with that, the wheat and the tares, you have to understand what that concept of a tare is like. I mean, you say wait, but Satan, the evil one, has sown tares amongst us, amongst the church, and there has to be patience. And that idea of not judging is so critical to understanding that. There will come a time when people will be judged.
It's hard for us not only to say, thy will be done, but thy time will be done. And I think that's one of the important things that we see, is that the parables of the kingdom are telling us that the Lord's will is going to be done. The kingdom is going to go forth like Daniel saw in vision. Jesus is teaching us in parables that it's going to go forth and fill the world. It's going to be that great mustard tree. It's going to do all those things. The real question is not so much about the kingdom, but about us as members of that kingdom. Are we going to be wheat or tares in that regard?